Good evening, everyone. And thanks for coming out to our Must-See Mondays this evening. And this session focuses on a topic that's very important to me because it was something that I had an opportunity to do in my non-distinguished journalist career, which was business journalism. And I spent about 3 years as a business journalist and got to really do some real cool stories and some things that really I felt were probably the most impactful work that I did of my career. And so tonight we are, in addition to honoring our Bartlett and Steele award winners, we're going to have a discussion about business journalism and honoring the best in investigative business journalism. And so just to take a moment, investigative journalism and education around investigative journalism is part of our curriculum here at the Cronkite School. We have the Howard Center for Investigative Journalism, and we've done some very impactful work in the Howard Center and very impactful work in News 21. And then we have, of course, it is our privilege to have the Reynolds Center for Business Journalism here at the Cronkite School, and that's part of what makes us special. And we recently have hired Dr. Jeffrey Timmermans to be our leader, the director of the Reynolds Center. And so we're really excited about where we're going to be able to go. And that's part of our tradition, that's part of our legacy. And so tonight we're going to have a really great and engaging conversation about the impact of business journalism, because I think a lot of you maybe you don't know, when you think about business journalism, it is so much more than reporting on earnings reports. It's so much more than reporting on stocks and investments. Business journalism really cuts across all disciplines. And just to go back to my experience as a business journalist, I got to do stories on things such as the business of men's fashion. And I got to go to New York City and spend 3 days in New York City on a buying session with a menswear shop in Virginia Beach, and to learn about the business of men's fashion. I got to interview Mike Vick when he signed the largest contract at that point in history with Nike. And I got to do a story that was about the business of sports and then the business of entertainment. And so there's so much more to business journalism than you might think. And so I really encourage you all tonight to ask, really good questions about, investigative journalism as it pertains to business, because our speakers tonight have done some very impactful and outstanding work in that space. And again, as Dean, I'm very, very pleased to have them here with us. So now I'll call to the microphone Jeffrey Timmermans, the director of the Reynolds Center for Business Journalism here at the Cronkite School.
Great, thank you, Dean Batts. And thanks to all of you for joining us here to help us celebrate tonight. The Reynolds Center established the Bartlett and Steele Awards in 2007 to recognize the importance of investigative business reporting and to promote in-depth, accurate journalism in the public interest, which is the mission of the center. These awards are named for the only reporting team to receive 2 Pulitzer Prizes for national reporting and 2 National Magazine Awards for magazine work, Don Barlett and Jim Steele. Unfortunately, Don and Jim couldn't be with us in person here tonight, but we are delighted to have Jim Steele joining us via Zoom. And I'll turn it over to the big screen so Jim can say a few words before we present the awards to our winners. Jim. Do we have Jim on the Zoom?
Hello.
Jim, hello. Jim, we can hear you. There we go. Now we can see you too.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, Jim, thank you so much for joining us tonight from Philadelphia.
Well, it's my pleasure to join you, Jeff, and thank you very much for those kind remarks. And I'm looking forward to this very much, and very sorry I can't be there tonight because this award is very close to my heart. And I've been very thrilled over the years to see the kinds of work that it has spotlighted and heralded. So I just wanted to say one thing. The particular awards that are being honored tonight are so in the spirit of the Bartlett and Steele Award. These are stories about, in-depth stories about business issues. They're stories that deal with very complicated issues and try to interpret those. They're stories that shine lights into dark places. In other words, these are the kinds of stories that are not sound bites. You know, they're substantive, in-depth kinds of things. And frankly, despite all the things we hear about people reading fast and so forth, people still like substantial, in-depth journalism, whether it comes in writing, whether it comes in video, radio, whatever the medium, online, people still like substance when it's done right. And these three award winners, all of these projects were done beautifully. All three explain very complex issues and their importance in our democracy. On the surface, the three of them might appear to be unrelated. I mean, one is on billionaires avoiding federal taxes. Another is on the mysterious palm oil industry in Asia, about which I knew very little until I read these articles. And the last one is on logging and some of the abuses that companies are perpetrating in Oregon, seemingly unrelated. But to me, there's a real unifying theme to all of them. And that theme is how powerful interests exert their will to the detriment of many average citizens, and why we as journalists must expose that kind of activity so that perhaps those people can be held accountable. That, of course, is what investigative journalism is all about. What shines especially bright for me in all three of these projects is the reporting. These are not opinion pieces. Now, I really want to stress them because sometimes the public gets confused about what's reporting and what's opinion. These are solid, fact-based stories that interweave interviews, data, and documents to produce compelling stories about what's gone wrong with parts of our system and the impact it's having on average people. The Barlett and Steele Award was conceived to encourage exactly the kinds of awards that we're bestowing tonight, to honor those kinds of things. Stories that give us vivid human accounts of people, the good and the bad, but also show data and documentation that show how those human examples are not just isolated instances of something that's gone wrong, but in many cases part of a much larger pattern. The ones here tonight, the stories, the projects we're going to honor tonight, are in the tradition, I think, of the finest business journalism, investigative stories you will ever find. And in closing, I just want to say Don and I could not be more honored than to be associated with these articles through the Barlett and Steele Awards here at the Cronkite Center. Thank you so very much.
Thank you so much, Jim. Thank you, Jim, and please stick around. I hope you'll stick around for the discussion after the presentation of the awards.
Absolutely.
Excellent, thank you. Before I go to the gold winners of this year's awards, I want to take a moment to acknowledge the bronze and silver award winners who may not be physically present, but whose investigative work was instrumental in exposing injustice and inspiring a call for change. The Bronze Award was awarded to the reporting team of Tony Schick of Oregon Public Broadcasting, Rob Davis of The Oregonian, and Leila Yunus of ProPublica for their three-part investigative series, The Cutting. To demonstrate how lawmakers put the profits of big businesses ahead of rural Oregonians. Let's give a round of applause for the Oregonian team. For the Silver Award, Margie Mason and Robert McDowell, reporters at the Associated Press, were honored for their Fruits of Labor series that documented the horrific human rights abuses in the multi-billion-dollar palm oil industry in Malaysia and Indonesia. Their years-long reporting produced immediate impact and told these heartbreaking stories in a compelling narrative about global injustice. So much so that their series is currently a finalist this year for a Pulitzer Prize in investigative reporting. Let's give a warm round of applause for Margie and Robin. On to the Gold Award, this year's top prize. In June this year, ProPublica began a series titled Secret IRS Files, that looked inside the tax records of the 0.001%. The first featured piece of the series dove into a trove of never-before-seen records of billionaires such as Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, and Warren Buffett that showed how little, if any, the wealthiest among us pay in taxes. The effort was led by Jesse Eisinger, Paul Keel, and Jeff Ernsthausen, and we are honored tonight to have Jesse and Jeff with us to accept the Bartlett and Steele Gold Award for Investigative Business Journalism. Jeff Ernsthausen is a data reporter at ProPublica who has previously worked on the investigative team at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, where he exposed sexual abuse by physicians nationwide, police misconduct in Georgia, and evictions in Metro Atlanta. Jesse Eisinger, a reporter and editor at ProPublica who has previously won a Pulitzer Prize for national reporting with another colleague for a series on questionable Wall Street practices that helped make the 2007-2008 global financial crisis the worst since the Great Depression. These colleagues spent months vetting everything from Securities and Exchange Commission filings to legal records to interviewing sources and experts to accurately reveal what the true tax rate of the wealthy is. Their team reached the pinnacle of investigative journalism, and that is why they have been awarded the top prize this year. Jeff, Jesse? Come get your award, guys. Come on. Gotta make sure I give you the right one. You guys hold it, not me. Great, thank you so much. Please. Thank you. So let's bring Jim back on the stage, on the screen for some from questions and answers. And Jim, would you like to go ahead and ask the first question?
Yes, thank you very much, Jeff. By the way, before I ask this question, needless to say, I'm just in awe of the work that you did on this project. I've written a little bit about taxes over the years myself, so I know some of the complexities and the issues that you sometimes face, but one of the ones that particularly intrigued me, and Jeff just alluded to it, was the issue of how you came up with what you call the true tax rate. Obviously, one of the most explosive and novel parts of your work. This rate, as I recall, was like 3.4%, and it was comparing the wealth of many billionaires over a period of time and what they actually paid in federal taxes during that period. Can you tell us a little bit about how you came up with this concept and whatever difficulties you faced in getting it into shape so that you could put it in your article?
Absolutely, and I can start, and then Jeff can add to it. But first, I want to say thank you, Jim. Thank you to the Cronkite School and the Reynolds Center, and Jeff for hosting us. We are immensely flattered to have won this award. We think of it, ProPublica thinks of it as one of the premier awards in all of investigative journalism, all of journalism itself. And so thank you very much. And I want to emphasize that Jeff and I are accepting this on behalf of a significant team at ProPublica. Paul Keel, my partner on an earlier series about the IRS, was integral to this. And then James Bandler, Justin Elliott, Trish Callahan, Ellis Samani, Doris Burke, Robert Federici have all worked intensively on this series, and I want them to be recognized too. So there's a backstory, Jim, to getting the information, but and we can fill that in a little bit later. But once we had verified this vast trove of IRS information, which covers thousands of the wealthiest Americans, sort of the 1% of the 1%, and it covers more than 15 years. Once we had gone through the rigorous process of validating it and verifying it, figuring out that this was real information about real people, household names, the Bezos and Buffetts and Musks and Bloombergs of the world, then something really jumped out at us. I think we initially thought that we would look at their traditional taxes paid on their income. And we thought, this is the standard way that you measure tax rate, you look at the effective tax rate. You look at how much income they're bringing in, and you look at how much they're paying. And we thought that that would be quite revelatory. But, and it turns out that billionaires and the wealthiest of the wealthiest pay a lower effective tax rate than even someone making, middle-class salary, $70,000 or $80,000. So we thought that's a blockbuster story, that the billionaires in our country can actually pay less in taxes on their income than average middle-class Americans. But we quickly realized that that was actually not the most important story. We quickly realized that, and this was in conversations that Paul and Jeff and I had intensively over months, talking to experts and looking at the numbers and letting the numbers speak to us. And what we realized was that billionaires don't take income, or when they take income, it's a voluntary thing. And they could go in individual years. Jeff Bezos, for 2 recent years, could pay 0 in taxes. And Elon Musk in 2018 could pay 0. And Michael Bloomberg could pay 0 in 2010. And George Soros could pay 0 for 3 years in a row. And so we were trying to figure out, how couldn't they possibly pay 0 in taxes? And we realized that the story is actually in income. And what it is that the mega wealthy, the super rich, actually are outside of our tax system. I assume everybody in this room, I don't see Elon, he hasn't blessed us with his presence today. We all get, when we're working, we get W-2s, the taxes get taken out, we don't have much choice about, we have to work to live, and we get income and the taxes get extracted. The billionaires take income when they want, generally by selling assets. They do that in the time and place of their choosing. And often they don't have to do that. And in fact, often they don't do it for years and years and years. Warren Buffett almost never has sold Berkshire Hathaway. And instead, what these billionaires can do is borrow against their assets, which is tax-free. And so we went about trying to measure what the rate of their wealth growth is, because their wealth growth is really their income. It provides all of their economic means, all of their economic power. And they borrow against their wealth growth and fund their lifestyles and fund their political donations and fund everything that helps them live and express their influence and power while maintaining both their wealth and control of their companies. Do you want to add? So that's why we had to bring in somebody like Jeff, because I can envision that idea, and Paul could calculate it, but we really needed Jeff, whose expertise is actually in truly calculating the numbers rather than just envisioning it.
Yeah, so as Jesse sort of laid out there, for most of us, most of what we're going to sort of take in and put into our piggy banks in our lifetimes is going to come from earnings. Middle class people might also have a house, and we'll get some appreciation from that. But by and large, what you're going to live off of for your whole life is going to be money that you've earned. And that is all going to be taxed. While people who are somebody like Jeff Bezos is going to mostly get his, what's important for him from the appreciation of his Amazon stock, from the rise in the value of the stock. And that's all, like Jesse said, that's all outside of the system. It's unrealized gains, while everything that you take in is going to be within the system. And I think it was, challenging to figure out how to bring that concept forward in a story, but we were able to find a data set that speaks to the finances of average Americans to help make a comparison to what's going on with billionaires, and picking sort of the metrics that seem most germane to normal people versus the one that's most germane for the billionaires we were looking at.
So we ended up finding that not only do the top 25 pay $3 on every in taxes on every $100 of their income, which is their wealth growth, but some of them spend are paid so much less, because Warren Buffett, who is a grandfatherly figure, he's beloved, he's got full of homespun wisdom, we found that he is perhaps the greatest tax avoider in American history. And we found that he pays 10 cents in taxes for every $100 he brings in wealth. So average Americans making a middle-class salary are paying $15, $17 or so per $100 of income, and Warren Buffett is paying 10 cents.
Amazing, amazing. I wanted to jump in with a question, and then we'll open up from questions from the floor, because I know you guys have tons of questions you want to ask these guys. In this work, you're dealing with massive amounts of data, I can imagine. And one of the things that I'm fascinated by is how do you, from this huge amount of data, how do you organize it, and how do you verify it? How do you make sure it's all the right thing, there are no red herrings in there, that it is accurate and authentic?
Yeah, well, I'll start, and then you should jump in. But I'll just back up to say, unfortunately, we're not explaining when we got the information or how we got the information, because we want to protect the source of sources. But the very first task before us when we got the information was to try to figure out whether this was true or not. And right away, when you looked at it, it passed the smell test. It was full of arcane IRS jargon that would be very hard to fake or replicate. And it was such an enormous amount of information that it would take a great deal, it would take an unfathomable amount of time to produce it. So right away, it seemed real, but we were deeply paranoid that even if some of it was real, that maybe other things weren't real. We had not been directed to look at anything, so that was good, actually. We'd been given raw information that with no preconceived notions of where we should start to look. And so that was kind of a great relief, because we weren't being directed to something that could have been faked. But it turns out that there's a lot of tax information in the ether, in the public domain, in SEC filings, in lawsuits, in public disclosures from politicians, and we could compare a lot of that to the data. But then we had this further layer of paranoia, thinking, well, if we can find it in the public domain, someone else can find it. And so we felt like we needed to find private sources of information who would trust us and give them information and ask them to verify it. And they did. And then there were other ways that we could verify some private information. And once we had done that, and maybe we had over 50 different points of verification, discrete points of verification, after that, we had very great confidence that this was genuine. But that wasn't the end of it.
Yeah, so we got this again, and as Jesse said, it's in a pretty raw form. So the first several months of work involved writing code to get this ultimately into like a system that not just somebody like me who happens to do code could take a look at it. So it was spent months sort of taking the raw information, putting it into that system. We're talking millions of rows of data here, and then simultaneously kind of working along the track that Jesse's describing. So, being able to get it into a format where we'd be able to look at individuals so that we could go out and compare it to, potentially, previously existing public information, and then sort of building out our toolkit so that we would be able to look at a specific person's, their filings, other information that had come in with that was related to them. So there's sort of a lot of upfront sort of work as we're simultaneously trying to get our heads around the most important concepts that we're going to want to report out.
And I tell you, this was an incredibly difficult task that largely Paul and Jeff did, and I witnessed rather than helped. Was more of an encumbrance. But I got to say that it's sort of like the old line from Ginger Rogers that doing this, what what they were doing in normal times would have been difficult, but they were doing it backwards and in heels during COVID. And so, this was on Signal, on Zoom, all in far-flung places, trying to coordinate all of this information and communicate. It was, you don't want to replicate that. Don't try it at home.
I guess I should have asked you guys for my one question, how I can minimize my taxes, but I guess I'm not in the same tax bracket.
Well, we're very proud that we've had a personal finance cottage industry of people, especially the Wall Street Journal has taken our stories and written personal finance advice stories about that. So, how you too can create an IRA to avoid taxes. We consider that impact.
Excellent. That is indeed impact. Guys, so happy to open up to the floor for questions. Please, we have a microphone right in the middle of the aisle there, so please feel free to come on up and ask any questions you might have of Jesse and Jeff.
This is tall. Hello, my name is Naomi Jordan. I'm a freshman at Cronkite, and my question is, for people at the school right now who want to go into investigative journalism or are looking to do that for their career, what's something at this stage in our career that we can do to prepare ourselves for, I don't know, maybe something we wouldn't necessarily think about when you think of investigative journalism?
Yeah, it's a good question. And my answer is that investigative journalism is kind of a bullshit branding term, if I may. And I don't think that it's not a separate category of special journalist with journalistic powers that are unknown and unavailable to normal journalists. It's actually what all journalists should do. If you're a reporter, you want to find out what's going on, and then you want to ask why. And and that's what investigative journalism does. It asks why, and then when the answers to why are that something is going wrong or it's not working very well, then you want to figure out who's responsible for it. And you can do this in any covering in anything. You can do it in food. You can do it in sports. Obviously, you can do it in business coverage. You can ask why the Cronkite School is being run the way it is. I bet not everything is perfect here. We'd like to sick you on your professors and your
Actually, it is perfect. It is perfect. Let's move on.
Okay. Well, the Reynolds Center is certainly now perfect. So my answer is you just have to be a pain in the ass and ask a lot of impertinent questions and be endlessly and boundlessly curious. And open-minded about the answers. And then, voila, you're in investigative journalism.
I'll give a slightly less
Profane.
take. I do think there are some things. I think demonstrating the ability to do these kinds of stories. I think there's lots of investigative stories out there that involve assembling a bunch of information that no one's bothered to assemble and taking sort of the universal look at a topic. And so, to the extent that you can find records out there that you don't think people have looked at, that stuff's often ripe for getting a story that hasn't been done yet. And so I would say that getting familiar with like the local laws regarding open records would be good. I may be biased, but I don't think it hurts to learn how to use Excel and other data tools. All those things will give you a leg up on other folks later on.
Hi, my name is Abigail Beck. I'm a freshman here at Cronkite. And my question is, when writing such an in-depth and time-consuming story like this one, how do you as investigative reporters separate your professional life and your personal life, especially when you're on Zoom and your office is in your house?
Yeah. Well, I am still married, so that was might have been a close call over the last year. But it was a funny thing to kind of work on this extraordinary secret and have this kind of explosive golden thing sitting on my living room table while my wife was in the other room. She's a journalist working on her things, but we're very supportive of each other's careers. And oddly enough, even though we were on top of each other and got sick of each other and got sick of the kids on a regular basis, you didn't have to commute, so there was time. So I've eaten dinner with my kids more in the last 2 years than I did in the first 10 years of my older daughter's life. So there were some oddly odd upsides to working on top of each other, even though I got into trouble on some occasions when I would wake up in the middle of the night and check something on the computer because I really wanted to understand what Michael Bloomberg had paid in 2009.
I was thinking about this last week because I took a couple of days off, and I was thinking, like, life has felt really unbalanced this year, and then I also thought, well, like, when else should life be unbalanced? Like, when you have this amazing trove of stuff, this is the time to have a bad work-life balance because this isn't going to happen every year of my life. So, every now and then I think you're just like, this is why we're doing this. This is so exciting. Why wouldn't I just be doing it a lot, all the time? But I do think, if this was like the pace for 2 or 3 years, there'd need to be some adjustments made. But sometimes this stuff is really exciting, and part of like the reason we're into it is because we're passionate about it. So
yeah, it felt it was an extraordinary feeling. It was totally obsessive because you felt like we'd been given Promethean knowledge, into the inner world of the way the world actually works. So it was so exciting, but it also was incredible pressure because we felt like we needed to match the moment. We had been given something, one of the most remarkable troves of information ever obtained by journalists, and then we needed to meet it and do good stories that people cared about. And I think we felt enormous pressure, and we're very grateful that this is an indication that it did resonate with people, because that was what our task was. And I don't think anybody really slept that well for the last the couple of months that we had leading up to the first story.
Thank you.
Sure.
Hi, my name's Austin Green, and I am a master's student here at Cronkite. You've talked a lot about kind of your process of just kind of getting this massive trove of data and then finding a story out, parsing a story out from that. I'm just wondering how long that process took from the time, this data showed up on ProPublica's doorstep to kind of going through it, figuring out what the angle was, figuring out what the how you were going to disseminate this and report on it, and then also what tools you use to kind of crunch all the numbers.
Yeah, well, we're eliding specifically how much time it took, because we don't want anybody to understand when we actually got the information. But we have said it's months, and the months were taken up cleaning up the information, transferring the information into a usable form, which Jeff can tell you a little bit more about, and then gathering a lot of reporting resources, because it started out as just me and Paul Keel, and then we quickly realized we needed data reporters, and then we had 3, which is a decent amount for any one project at ProPublica. And then we realized, oh my God, we need more resources. So I spent the first sort of 6 weeks banging on the desks, or the virtual desks of the editors, to give me more reporters and build my empire, and finally have the power that I'd always deserved to have. But we were really supported in that. In fact, everybody saw it immediately that this was worthy of more reporters. And then we started figuring out stories, writing a lot of memos. So we were writing memos with all the story ideas that we have, and our memos go on for, we've got 20 more stories that we could possibly do here. This is the kind of data set that could carry us easily through next year, if not more. And what we want to do is prioritize and figure out how to deliver the stories. So that was what we were doing for the first several months.
Yeah, I think it's hard to give a good gauge of how much work was involved, but this is definitely sort of unusual. I mean, everything at ProPublica is unusual in that it takes a while to do, but this was definitely unusual in the amount of resources put in and the kind of lead time required to, put even the first story out, because as Jesse said, we're kind of like simultaneously trying to say, well, we've got to be looking down the field at all the next stories and getting work done on those as well. And then as far as the tools we're using, I don't think we're, as a data journalist, I'm always relying mostly on, SQL. So that's our, bread and butter. And I don't think that's giving much away. Thank you.
Sure.
Hi, my name is Tracy Abiak. I'm a master's student here. Mine is a three-part question, so sorry.
Is somebody going to take notes?
Yeah, just take notes. So the first one is, you talked about how the story resonated with people. Why did you feel it had such a massive impact as it did, and it resonated with so much people? The other part is, were you surprised by any of the feedback or comments you received in the aftermath of publishing the story? And the third question is, doing such high quality work with investigative reporting, what elements would you recommend in writing an investigative piece in order to create as much impact as possible?
Good question. So I think that so the first and the second part are kind of related in the sense that one of the things that we worried about is that people would say, we know this. And they would have a very cynical reaction to it. That we know that the wealthy get away with it. We know that the wealthy have a different system than the rest of us. So it was not a surprising reaction. We did get that reaction from people. But I think that the reason it resonated, in fact, was that many people didn't have that kind of cynical reaction and were actually pretty stunned that these are the actual facts, names, dates, the actual numbers. I think when you see the raw power of the numbers, when you actually learn that Jeff Bezos can go 2 years when at that point he was the richest man in the world, without paying zero in taxes and getting the child tax credit. And
you got
now
a child tax credit?
Yeah, he got a child tax credit because he had such low income. And subsequently, we've just last week we published a story that 18 billionaires, because they report such low income, in fact, sometimes they report negative income, that they got COVID-19 stimulus checks. And so, income is such a rare thing, or such a voluntary thing for billionaires, that they can report negative income. They can report losses, and then they got stimulus from the government for that. So when you do that, I think it can resonate. Although we were very worried. You have no idea how it's going to be. I told this last night, so I'm repeating myself. But I couldn't sleep the night before, and I got up at about 4:45, 4:30, and we published our stories at 5, and we published our story, and I tweeted it out, and then I waited and looked to see the retweets, and about 5:15, 5:20 or so, it only had 3 or 4 retweets or something like that, and I thought, oh, okay, it's a flop. Nobody's going to read it. No one's going to care. I knew this all along. Nobody's going to care. And then it turns out that there aren't that many people up at 5:15 on Twitter ready to retweet me. And then by 7 o'clock, it had sort of caught fire. And so, but you just never know, and you can't do the story for to have it resonate or to have impact. It's nice to have resonance and it's nice to have impact, but really you have to do the story because the fire is in your belly to write that story at that moment, and make it as accessible as possible, and then the winds take it.
I guess you did 1 and 2, I'll do 2 and 3. I think surprise-wise, I was like slightly surprised to go on the radio in the Bay Area, and people were surprisingly like, "You idiot, like we don't tax unrealized gains in this country," basically. And then I was like, oh, I was thinking like Bay Area, it's like, super liberal. And I was like, oh, it's also full of people who are planning on making a lot of money with their unrealized gains from their tech venture someday.
Yeah.
So that was actually a response I expected, but I just was surprised by the audience. So on the third one, I think when I look at this, sort of how the stories in the series sort of did with readers, I guess, I think one of the things that about making an impactful investigation is putting really clear, in this case, numbers for us, but a really clear takeaway up the top. I think everybody can understand 0, So being able to say seeing and being able to say, look, they paid nothing. Like, people can get that and understand what that means. And, being able to say, Peter Thiel had a $5 billion IRA. People get those kinds of things. So to the extent that you can make the finding sort of singular and easy to grasp, I think that's the route to like having strong impact and focusing on things that are clear. Sometimes they may be murky, but to the extent that you can make it clear in that way, I think you can get things to resonate with people.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I just want to elaborate that we were not surprised and did anticipate the central criticism of the story, which is what we got, which was that we do not tax income. We do not tax unrealized gains in this country. We only tax income, and we spent a lot of time thinking about that. And that's a testament to a good story is going to look in the eye of what the potential criticisms are and the potential flaws in the argument, and address those. And we did address those in the text of the story. We gave historical analysis. We gave an explanation of what that, why we were choosing that methodology. We stand by it. We think it actually adds something to it. But we were actually quite gratified that you live in deathly fear that someone is going to expose a flaw that you hadn't thought of. And so far, we've been lucky enough that we have anticipated the criticisms and addressed them ahead of time in the text.
And to that, I would also add, like, when you're criticizing a system, like, inevitably, people are going to say, well, this is the system.
Right.
So.
Thank you.
Sure.
Hi, my name is Pratham, and I'm a freshman. I have 2 questions for you. First, for this story specifically, what was your inspiration or your end goal for the story? Was it more to satisfy a personal curiosity, or to do this for the public's understanding of how the tax system works? And then my second question is, what challenges did you run into when it came to analyzing the data specifically?
Yeah, well, you could take 2. In terms of one, wait, repeat it again. I'm getting old and I can't remember
It's
it.
been a long day. It's been a long
exactly.
day.
Was the story done to help satisfy a personal curiosity?
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Well, so there's a little bit of a backstory, which is that Paul Keel and I had done a series of stories about the IRS in 2018. The reason we had decided that to look at the IRS for we thought that the Trump administration was kind of interested in manipulating or influencing the federal bureaucracy, and the obvious place for them to do that and to abuse power would be the IRS, where there's some historical precedent for that because Nixon had done that as well. And we thought if we develop sources at the IRS and we're looking for that story and that would make sense, maybe someone will slip us Trump's taxes as well. So it turned out that Trump didn't really manipulate the IRS because the bureaucracy of the IRS is essentially not very manipulatable, and no one slipped us. They slipped it to the New York Times. I don't know why they would do that, but they did. So we did, in fact, we did find a story. And the story was extraordinarily boring series of stories that were very important about the gutting of the IRS and the dismantling of our tax collection system. And they were not very widely read. Paul and I did an enormous amount of work on that, and they're really hard stories to do and very hard to get inside the bureaucracy and explain what was going on and how it was being gutted and how, effective oversight of big corporations and the wealthy was essentially being, the government was no longer able to do it. And then we moved on, but somebody had seen those stories, sources had seen those stories, and then gave us the information. And once that happened, this wasn't like a personal passion project. Once we got the information, we realized, well, we're sitting on something very important that says something about one of the most important trends in American society, the explosion of wealth inequality in this country, and all that stems from it, all of the injustice and all of the dysfunction that stems from a rise in wealth and income inequality. And we thought, well, now we have the numbers to prove it and demonstrate that and write about that. And so we were really, we thought we were taking one of the great themes in American society of the last 40 years, and we're trying to explain it. So it was not a kind of personal predilection or interest. It was that we had an historical moment to meet.
The second question was about issues with the data.
Yeah, any challenges you ran into?
Yeah, lots of them. I'm trying to think of the ones that I can talk about without revealing anything too much. But yeah, I mean, I think when we, got it, we were like sort of just imagining the universe of what could be inside of, data on taxpayers, and then we set about sort of figuring out like, well, what of that do we actually have and what don't we have, which we had to spend time figuring out. I mean, a huge issue with the data is that we had to learn what almost all of these forms were that we would possibly be, trying to look into. We had to, look at tax forms and then think about like issues with the data is like, this is complicated as hell. Like, so, those were kinds of things we were trying to get our heads around. I mean, we at some point needed to marry, external information, estimates of wealth from Forbes to what we were working with its own set of challenges. There was a sort of just an endless amount of data work involved with this. So I don't know, it's a flavor, but it's about as specific as we can get.
All right, thank you so much.
Sure.
Hi, I'm Adriana. I'm a grad student here. So my question, I don't know if you guys will be able to answer it, but I was just wondering, you guys have mentioned that you've gotten this treasure trove of like data handed to you, and you've obviously had to take extra pains to not reveal your sources, but you've also, in order to process all the data, you've had to bring in extra hands and reporters and people to help you process all of it. So what kind of what kind of steps did you guys have to take to like try and protect your source and keep this story under wraps while you were working on it?
Yeah, that was of paramount importance to us, and very quickly it was clear that we needed to protect the information and keep it secure and not reveal to people that we had it or even specific things about it. One thing that I did not realize that Jeff taught me was that sometimes saying what we don't have is more revealing than what we have. So I had to train myself to explain to people, not to tell them what things that we didn't have. And so we needed to keep it secure. And we needed to imagine who this might be valuable to, because we did not solicit this information. It would be unethical for us to have solicited it. It came to us, but the source or sources was running legal risk, and so we wanted to protect to the best that we could the source or sources about that. And that meant not revealing too much about the information. Plus, we realized that this, normally I don't like a lot of investigative journalism theater about security, because I think that can be kind of romanticizing yourself and trying to recapture the lost moments of Watergate. And we don't get to meet sources in garages. We just work on SQL. And so we want to make ourselves seem a little sexier than we are. But in this case, we did think that the data we could make us a target of actors who were adversarial to the United States. Okay. And so we really wanted to kind of imagine that. And then we wanted to take personal steps to clean up our passwords, so that because we thought we might be potential targets for hackers. So there was a lot of discussion about that. Jeff was really helpful because he was thinking about this on a detailed way, but we really tried to be extremely careful about it.
And we're lucky to have someone on staff who's, I think, spent some time potentially working on some of the tools of security on the internet that people use, to protect themselves. And like Tegas, who's got like galaxy brain on like potential threats. So we'd be able to kind of get on the phone with him and our lawyer and kind of go through like, okay, what are the steps we're going to take here to make sure that this stuff is not, obtainable by anybody by accident or by subpoena to someone that's not us. I mean, we wanted to really make sure that there was no, that this was not going to end up out of our hands.
Thank you.
Sure.
Well, thank you guys very much. I'm afraid we're going to have to wrap up our conversation for the evening, but I did want to say thank you to Jeff and Jesse for being such good sports. We have kept you moving almost since you landed in Phoenix. You've been very generous with your time. So thank you very much for joining us here tonight, and thank you for your work. And please keep it up.
Our pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks.
And I want to say, yes.
Oh.
Yeah, applause.
More.
And I also want to say thank you again to Jim Steele for joining us. I know, Jim, it's not an ideal situation, with you in Philly and us here in Phoenix, but if it's any consolation, you have loomed over us, literally, tonight with your image above us. And I want to extend a public invitation so that I can't take it back later, that once we get the logistics figured out, we'd love for you to join us here in Phoenix at an event just like this.
Sounds great. I'll happily come out.
Great. So thank you. Thank you so much, Jim.
Thank you so much. And congratulations to you both as well.
Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you all for coming. And, I hope you've learned a lot about investigative journalism. And I dearly hope that a future winner of the Bartlett and Steele Award is in the audience tonight. I certainly hope so. Thank you all very much.